Now the format for this panel is, it's based on a similar session that was held at Aluna, and Sue Harmer reported that it was a really successful session at Aluna. So we slightly modified the questions and in that time has moved on. And so we have a series of questions, and one or more of our panel is going to comment on these questions, give their experiences, and then Melanie may offer a response after each question. But first of all, if you want to give a brief introduction to yourselves. Anyone? Do you know? Debbie has the slide.
I just made a slide, so
Yep.
I don't mind.
Find it.
Hello, my name is Debbie Storz. I'm the Serials and Datasets librarian at Swinburne University. I have not been to an ANZREG meeting before. My colleagues and managers Tony Davies and Gary Hardy have been a part of this group. We are mid-implementation, so therefore Tony is very busy and Gary retired. Gary, I do have to say thank you to him. He did spearhead this effort. Just to tell you a little bit about us, we migrated to Aleph back in January 2010, and at that time we didn't have any ERM to manage our electronic resources, and we're hoping to use Verde, and that didn't quite work out. So just in discussions with Libris and knowing about their new URM that was coming and could manage all resources sounded very appealing, and therefore Gary did take advantage of that, and we jumped on board as a regional development partner. I just wanted to show you a little bit about what we currently have and just give you a sense of a timeline. First cab off the rank, first team, but we will go live a month earlier. We literally have had access to our Alma with our migrated data since the 21st of November, just to give you a sense of where we're at, and we're now at 7 weeks to go live, and had functional. Oh, sorry, did you not realize that too? 7 weeks. Yay.
It's months away yet.
So that's just a little bit of background of where Swinburne is coming from, and I'll talk in more detail as the questions come about.
Thank you, Debbie. Okay, avert your eyes. I'll get rid of this.
Oh, just a There you go.
We're not going to get through all these questions, okay? Okay, here we go. So the first question is, what benefits did your institution identify prior to becoming an early adopter? Have these benefits been realised? You imagine they're going to be realised? How responsive has Libris been to your institution as an early adopter? What is the mechanism for communication? Has this relationship changed as you move into the implementation phase? And all three of our panelists, maybe with comments from Melanie, are going to address this question.
So I can
Janette?
start.
Yep.
So
Mhm.
Janette Burke, Director Resources. Just quickly, before we go into this first question, we've got 8 campuses, over 3 million bib records to migrate, and 2 campuses in South Africa and Malaysia. So we're considering all sorts of options of how we'll use Alma and whether we can set up a consortium model or not. Still yet to be decided. So I guess one of the reasons that we did decide to go with Alma was that ability to potentially set up a consortium model, given we've got 8 branches and 2 are overseas, and the possibility of having another in China and India. So we could potentially add institutions as Monash grows globally. One of the other benefits was, of course, the management of electronic resources. That was one of the key things. We're all moving to and that was a big selling point for our decision on Alma, was to be able to manage our e-formats much better. And I'm also hoping that we can streamline a lot of our workflows, and I like the fact that Alma has made us consider going back to basics. So I think we've got something like 100 odd patron groups, and Alma has said, how about 4? So, you know, that's a really good challenging question for us to really reconsider our workflows. So I'll try and limit our answers, I guess.
I'll go into a little more depth. I already explained why we decided to become an early adopter. How responsive has Ex Libris been to us as an early adopter? We're obviously in the midst of it, so we decided to have a project manager to oversee our team. We're currently using, as a communication tool, the system Jira. I guess it's a software tracking system, so that as we are testing and as we are working through processes, we can bring these problems and write them up on Jira, and then we can send them on to Melanie if need be, and then she gives us advice or says when it will be fixed, or if we need to raise an SI. What else have we been doing? I don't know, is this the time I go into more detail with this? The Ex Libris has been responsive, though, to us. I guess another early situation that happened is with our configuration documentation. Obviously, that was critical to us starting this process, and the configuration data was not able to be auto-migrated. So Melanie has had to manually enter it. And so that's been something where we've had to keep in constant communication, because we found we literally couldn't do things with some of the migrated data. And it might have been because of a configuration situation. So again, using Jira, being in contact with you, and having a project manager who's solely dedicated to doing this has been helpful.
Okay, thank you, Debbie. Great.
Okay, from RMIT, it's sounding like we're possibly a more straightforward implementation in some way. We have almost every product that Ex Libris has on the market. We have, we're using Voyager. We're on 8.1 at the moment. We have Voyager Analyzer as a statistical package. We have Verde, and we will be the first institution to attempt to move that into the Alma fold. We do have Digitool, but we're not making a great deal of use of it, and we certainly haven't customized it in any complicated way. We have SFX and MetaLib, and we've just moved to having those hosted, and our instance of Primo is a Total Care hosted package. We were interested in moving to Alma, and notes from my boss say, because Ex Libris has shown long-term commitment to develop and a willingness to include their users in that. And I'm actually really pleasantly surprised by how responsive Ex Libris have been in our meetings, where over in Adelaide people have kind of shown themselves to be worried about the lack of a certain thing. A month down the track, it's, certain things are suddenly available. We were worried that we didn't have any way of counting the usage of reciprocal borrowers, the number of borrowers, the number of loans they've had, and we, in Australia, need to report on this on a yearly basis. We thought this was a huge problem, but things are, this was produced. It wasn't there by the time we extracted our data, but by the time we put it into Alma, it was just as an example of things that, where making comments about, and then suddenly a release or two later, things are there. So that's been very promising. And in comparison with us coming in at the tail end of Voyager, where if we asked for something, you would be told that the roadmap might not have a place for that in the foreseeable future. But this is really quite different at this stage with Alma. We had a visit over to the people at Swinburne a week back and looked at their Jira project management software, and are very envious of it. We're doing a lot of things, through Pivotal, just through loads and loads of emails and weekly conference calls, and have been very happy with the responses that we're getting from that.
Okay,
what I had
thank you. Melanie, did you want to make comments on this question?
Well,
From you?
just to say good. I'm glad. Yeah, I mean, obviously, we have to work very closely together, and your feedback is very important, and of course we want to act on it as we can and when we can, and improve things where they need improvements, and I hope we'll continue to do so.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Question 2. Now we've got 2 respondents for question 2, and it's Janette and Debbie. Janette and Debbie are going to talk about this particular question and how they're looking at business rules of functionality.
So at the moment we're taking a very blunt stick to a lot of our processes, I have to say, and I've gone around and sat with every staff member. There's about 40 of them, particularly in Information Resources, our Tech Services Department, and asked the question, why? Why are we doing it this way? Why are we doing it that way? We've now got our configuration spreadsheet, and we've assigned every tab to a person or a small working group. So we're much larger than RMIT and Swinburne, so we've got, Alma's going to have a huge impact on our workflows. So we've set up working groups to look at all of the tabs and to determine what of the policies can we change, and we're trying to do as many as we can now. We've been very fortunate that we've probably had 12 months of lead time before going live. We go to kick off in 5 weeks, so I'm starting to have a mild panic. So we've been, what we did is we set up the webinars twice a week and encouraged all of our staff to attend those, either one or the other. So we've had pretty well all of our staff for the last 10 weeks go through the 40 or 50 webinars, some twice as a group, so that they can sit there and talk about what doesn't it do, why does it do this, how we're going to map processes, just to try and get staff familiar. Also, and I'll talk a bit later about change management to help with the change management process, because the workflows are different. So we're doing a lot of that mapping, and as I said, I'm hoping some things won't ever actually come into Alma. I mean, 3 months ago claiming wasn't there, and I thought, good, we won't have to do any more claiming anymore, much to the horror of everyone else. But we've really started to question, do we need to continue binding? What does it matter if we've got few print serials and most of them will go to off-site store in a year? Do we really need to spend the 100,000 on binding anymore? Do we need to spend that time in Alma to do the binding? Do we need to spend months claiming for things? Could get it in document delivery in 24 hours and spend a quarter of the staff time doing that. So Alma's really been good to question all of our business processes and all of our policies, some of which we're trying to do now before we move to Alma. Some we've realised will be easier to do once we get into Alma. So that's sort of what we're doing to help try and relook at our business rules and our priorities.
Thank you. Debbie?
In Swinburne, we definitely have a smaller working team. There's just 12 of us in the, quote, tech services area. So we decided to, we're not really doing a lot implementation and migration. But we've definitely looked at our workflows. Right now we're separated by ordering one time or ordering something that's continuous, or like a subscription. So for our purpose, we literally turned on every role for every person so that we can try things, and we're using this as a time to explore and see what can happen. And then after we do go live, we'll maybe step back and see how everything will filter down if we do need to change our processes, if things are so much easier as Alma takes an item through the workflow. So.
Thank you. That's interesting, sort of turning everything on and then talking back. Just remember when we went from Dynex to Voyager 12 years ago, the working briefs the project manager had at that time was to make Voyager behave just like Dynex. It was a great way. Anything that you comment on?
Well, only to add that I think this is the perfect opportunity to do just as you're doing, to take it as an opportunity to review workflows, to ask why are we doing the things that we're doing. Is it just because we've always done it that way? What is the end result? And then see the most efficient way of getting there, rather than, well, we have to go through these particular steps because that's how we do it now. So I think this is the perfect opportunity to do that. And to remember that, Alma isn't Aleph and it isn't Voyager, it's something new. And to keep that in mind.
Thank you. Now, next question, we've got Greg and Debbie going to talk about this question, respond to this question about their data migration experience and their plans to date. Any data that you've decided not to migrate, or data that you were not able to migrate that you would like to migrate to bring across. So I'll let Greg go first.
Data migration experience. Well, we're actually still, even though we extracted our data late November and first saw it in our Alma instance a few weeks or perhaps a month later, we're still finding little surprises of things that aren't exactly as we expected. Generally, like a very good experience, very successful. We did discover that the whole process of filling in the migration forms and configuration forms, perhaps we had misinterpreted a few of the new pieces of terminology that were different from Voyager to Alma. That led us down a few wrong paths. Also in the just in the spreadsheets themselves, which are being constructed to help this process, there was slightly different terminology once again, which didn't exactly match up with what was in Alma either. And I think as a result I sometimes shows exactly the opposite of what we should have done. But there's the beginnings of a set of experiences which can help the rest of you as there's more implementations. In terms of things that didn't migrate and things that we'd rather not migrate, there's a few areas that might be problematic. We know that we knew from the documentation that we weren't going to get our circulation history of which patrons had borrowed which things, which items had been borrowed by which types of users. Some elements of that detail, of that data, does get dumped into a free text note field, so it's still there, but it's not part of your queryable database. So that's kind of okay, we can live with that. Some things that we still have issues with, which we have told Melanie, and she's well aware that we have issues with this. Things that, such as the hold requests that patrons have made up to our go live date, which will be at a really, really busy time just after Easter. At the moment, there's no way for Libris to get all of the pending requests in the correct order that they've been, in the queues that they've been requested in. into Alma, it also will have to lose that data or repopulate it quickly somehow, and we're still talking through issues like that. From the acquisitions side, and the cataloguing side, there's all sorts of scrappy old data that we've had stuck in our system for years that if we could delete it, we'd rather delete it if we could not migrate it across at all. Old locations that we no longer choose to use but might have a few things, a few phantom records still in there, or a few, things on purchase order lines that never kind of arrived and never could quite get deleted. We'd be happy to get rid of those, but it looks like they're going to sort of come across and we just have to sort of suppress them. Acquisitions data, whether we bring all of that or none of that across, I think we're still deciding how we go with that, whether it's a matter of starting again from scratch or bringing across everything, which will also include some dodgy data we're not very happy with. I think it's an all or nothing decision on that one. And being the first team to have a go at migrating Verde data, that hasn't been 100% successful so far, bringing data from Verde and matching that with some data from Voyager and some data from SFX hasn't all merged into the correct records so far, so there's ongoing work there. But overall, as we become aware of these issues, we're addressing them and resolving a lot of them, so it's been good.
Thank you, David.
Just to echo a few of the same things, Greg, that I know we've talked about this as well. A big one for Swinburne is, again, the requests that have not been filled, that they will not migrate, and we can average about 1,000 per month. So we hadn't budgeted for any manual entry because it looks like that's probably what we'll have to do. So just a heads up in that instance.
We're talking about 10,000 a month, maybe. So,
Okay,
it's
yeah.
big.
Some other things, course instructors not migrating for reading lists. So again, it goes into this notes field that Greg mentioned. I said earlier that interested users tab that we use to keep track of who initiated the order or who is interested in the item. We're losing that, so again, that'll be manual entry that we hadn't budgeted for. Let's see. And just from our library IT person, Fiona, she had mentioned, she wanted me to bring this up, not that she wouldn't tell you anyway, or maybe she has told you. It's interesting because during this process we have one migration, but now that Alma just continually flows and updates itself, and it's fascinating to see things that weren't there yesterday, it's there today, and it's great, and it's surprising, and we almost wish we had time for a second migration, just to see some of those things that they've now added, and we went, oh, now we can't see, so we're literally crossing our fingers now at Go Live.
And actually, sorry, I should wait for you to finish.
No, that was the last
Okay.
comment, yeah.
So yeah, and actually that's one of the things with the interested users, because that is a new tab that's been added to the purchase order actually since after the data migration. So I'm following up with David, the head of the data migration team, to actually whether we can get that migrated into there. We probably will have the same. The reason that Debbie mentioned about the course instructor actually not being migrated into the actual instructor field within the course records is that some of these things are free text fields in the source systems, where in Alma it's actually linked to the patron database. So it's actually getting that match, that correct match, is quite difficult. So what we did as part of the data migration is actually migrated it into a note field, where of course that free text can then be retained quite easily without the struggling with matching issues. The holds issue, we're very aware that it is a big deal. We are also quite surprised, and I know you're all quite surprised too, that it hasn't come up as a bigger issue in the past. That really, you know, that other the previously migrated institutions were able to deal with it one way or another. But I realise that it is a big issue, and we are still following up on that. We're still talking to product management and to data migration about what, if any, options we have. At the moment, as Debbie said, we're kind of thinking that that's the manual rekeying is the way we might have to go, but we're really hoping that that isn't going to be the way we have to go. So that's still an open issue that we are still working on.
And I think that's the difference between the American and the Australian systems. Australian libraries tend to be much heavier in borrowing and lending, whereas the American libraries tend to be more research based or not heavy borrowers of collections. So I think the holds system here is much more ingrained into our institutions than it perhaps is in the US, and so therefore it hasn't come up as an issue. So we all probably have holds and have a lot of them, just by the very nature of what we teach. Another thing to think about that we've thought about and had to make a decision on is that we were going to archive a lot of our data, but in the end, working with our IT department and determining where that archive of data would live, and have we got somewhere to put it, and have we got a system to sit over the top of it, so that when we do want to access it in a year's time, is it still readable? So we've decided we're not going to archive any data, and we're going to migrate the lot. Like, the system won't fall over as we migrate the lot, because it ended up getting too hard to determine what we would and wouldn't migrate, and whether, you know, we migrated to Voyager 12 years ago and we dumped it all into a big file and we can't read any of it anyway. So, you know, that's the other thing. So we thought, and one of our members on the steering committee who is there on looking at audit requirements said we just have to have this data, and what we can do is do a mass clean up or a mass delete 7 years after it's no longer required, and let's worry about that when we get to Alma, because we've got other things to do. So that's what we've sort of made decisions about data migration.
What do you think to keep for 7 years?
For audit purposes. Financial records, as in purchasing records.
Some of that's state-based rules too, isn't it?
Yeah,
sort of
absolutely.
Audit length and because the universities are all
valuation of collection, all of that. We don't keep any patron data now anyway for Privacy Act, so for police request data on what is user borrowed, we just don't have it. Sorry, can't provide it. So that was an easy rule for us to do. We just don't have it.
Okay, thank you. And the next question is going to be addressed by everyone actually. Have you planned or undertaken any data cleanup projects? Something near and dear to our hearts.
So interestingly, I just did an urgent text 2 seconds ago when Melanie told us we didn't have to clean up our records with no barcodes in them. So that was one of our major projects that we were starting to work on this week. So we went through the PowerPoints from Libris that outlined what we should be considering in our cleanup. There's no way we're going to clean up 300 mini marks, so we did a 2-month concerted effort last year and involved all of our branch libraries and all of our staff to clean up the top, I think, 5,000 of them, and we're just going to migrate the rest. And now we're working through what are the showstoppers. So the barcodes was going to be a showstopper. Our whole rare books collection didn't have barcodes, so there was the potential of that not being migrated. So it's really good that some of these changes are happening, but it means that we have to be very agile, because what we're spending time on today, we might have to spend time on it tomorrow. So we've got a bit of a working group going that we, as a steering committee, say priority today is this, but the priority tomorrow might be that, depending on new releases. So we've been going through all of the documentation, the Aluna documentation as well, about migration, and listening to people talking about what they've migrated and what we should have cleaned up and what we didn't clean up. So we're just constantly prioritising and reprioritising.
Again, this is the details that I got from our library tech people. They did a data cleanup of authorities, removed old patron records, deleted expired patrons, cleaned up the courses from course reserve. Again, we reduced loan types. What else? Yeah, those are some of the basic things. We've only had Olive for 3 years, so hopefully we don't have too much bad that we're taking with us, but just some natural things we've done. So.
Great.
We've been reading a lot of the documentation to establish which things might be best to clean up with the new functionality that Alma has, and which things are just better not to migrate in there in the first place. So we've done a lot of work on reducing the number of different locations we had. I think most universities will be in a similar position of having gradually accumulated more and more of those things. We've tried to whittle away completely those residual locations that had, a dozen items in there and weren't actually being used. And we've done pretty well, and there's just a tiny bit of work left to do on that. There's lots. We've ended up with lots of item statuses in Voyager. Voyager has 25 different statuses. Alma works on a completely different model. It's basically in place or not in place, and everything else is something different. It's not quite a status. So we're trying to clean up all of these things which are going to be migrated into kind of a notes field, and then in order to be functional would need to be sort of worked on once you're in Alma. We've deleted loads of expired patrons, and we're cleaning up the tricky ones with fines and long overdue records, writing off a lot of things that we don't expect to ever see again, and just for the sake of a clean record. They've been in Ebb and Richard's area. They've been doing loads and loads of work on cleaning up various elements of bib records. And acquisitions data, I think we're still not entirely sure whether we're taking all that across or not, but they're doing work on that as well.
So how many person hours are you sort of taking on doing all this data cleanup work? You've sort of got special staff assigned, or are you using regular staff and you're just backfilling those staff? Or?
For us, it's all our regular staff,
Yep.
but these are giant time-consuming projects which we think is worthwhile or essential at this stage.
We were lucky that we did a lot of this before Christmas, so we employed a lot of casuals for a month to do some really key clean-up work, and we've got all of the staff in all of our branches, so those staff that sit on service points that are in a bit of a quiet time, we did a bit of a training session and got them to clean up mini-mark records for us. We involved Cavell in helping us do mini-mark records for us so that we could move material out to store that we didn't want to have as part of the Alma migration. Location codes, we've got a little working group on that. And I think one of the key things for us is that we had to put deadlines and know that we're not going to get this perfectly right and that we're not ever going to complete some of it. So we said we've got this many staff for 4 weeks and that's it, then we're moving on to the next thing. And some of the working groups are going, please, I just need one more day to get rid of 20 more location codes. And so there's a bit of the shifting of the sands, but we've actually got the steering committee who help the working groups prioritise. So that's really important because the staff need to have that ability to say, we can stop doing this now, move on to the next thing.
And we're just using our current project team, and then our systems librarians are working overtime to run all of these processes, and to find time to run all of these processes to clean up the data. So.
Okay. Okay. Next question. Has the impact of regular releases during your implementation phase, and how have you managed this? I think, and Debbie and Greg are going to speak to this one. I think you've already commented on some of this.
It's magic.
That's a positive, right?
We've had just 2 releases during the implementation, and Libris sends out an email. I think they send it to everybody, and it says, here are the highlights. And one day I said something about, there was no fixed fields for enumeration, and I think 2 days later, enumeration was there, and there was a volume and an issue, and I could fill it in, and Melanie said, oh yeah, that was part of the, it happened 2 days ago, and so it's happening, and it changes things.
We've also definitely noticed the impact of these new releases. We were planning for our initial extract of data under the documentation for the November release, and desperately trying to get everything cleaned up and sort of working out how we were going to start assessing our data in Alma as soon as we looked at it. By the time we got it, we were under the December release, and so certain things were different already. And then by our functional workshop under the January release, we were saying things like, what do we do at the desk if someone comes up with a book that's not in the database? And when he started looking through the documentation, she said, oh, you click this new button. And there was a button that said add a new record. And so things like that are appearing just as we go along, which is great. Down the track, I think there's the potential that we could be caught out by the need for perpetual monthly training and sort of awareness to our staff that there are these new functions, and potentially changes to functions where things might not be something that used to do one thing might do another thing entirely. So it's great to be involved at this early stage where you are seeing things develop in response to probably a comment that you made or an email that you sent last week. There's this need for constant training, I guess.
Okay, the next question is on training.
Could I just make a comment?
Yes, sorry,
That
Richard,
we-
yes.
we may have to make a comment?
Yeah, no, go for it, yeah. Go for it.
We just foresee there's going to be a problem because we're trying to rearrange workflows and things, and we're going to have a big staff training component, probably about April. So we see, so when staff get trained, they want certainty. But we're trying to get people enthused about it and positive about it. So we want to sort of say, well, if you click this and do that, you'll be able to do this. So that's one of our sort of things.
And I think what we're going to see, at the moment, a lot of the things that we're adding, especially as Greg said in response to comments and things, generally are things that don't affect anything else. I think as we get further down the development track and enhancement requests or comments or statements are actually going to be on things where a lot of, being in this very early process, there's only a small number of you working live with Alma, and so only a small number where they might be using that particular feature. As we get on to more libraries actually being live with Alma, obviously we have to think more about the impacts of changes to workflows, and it isn't going to be as easy as we move forward, I think, just to be able to say, yeah, no worries, we'll change that now for you. I think we're going to have to ourselves put more analysis and more thought into the impact that a change like that will have on people that are already using Alma and already have workflows in place. Obviously, where it's new features, where it's new developments, that's fine, but where it's something changing in an existing feature or an existing workflow, then yes, we also have to be very aware of that, and we are.
Okay, thank you. So this,
as this is happening, are the interactions with Primo being tested, or this is really the data? I'm just not quite sure how those two.
The
Primo Voyager.
yes, as part of our project plan, we first get our Alma data migrated, and then for us, it's been about only 2 weeks ago we got our. And I think Swinburne just about the same time.
Yeah.
We got an instance of Primo linking to our Alma data, and so yeah, we're frantically or excitedly going through, looking at how all of those things are, you know, what a record looks like if it's coming from Alma in this format.
Is that Primo instance, do they have the same configuration as your original, or did they exit such a piece of data?
Initially, it retains the basic setup. I don't know what's gone into the construction of this at the back end, whether they just replicate it exactly or whether they have to go in and do a whole lot of work to make it like that. But basically, that is yeah, all the functions, all the setup configuration
So
of.
the end result is basically we have what the
Sorry.
No, so in terms of what you're seeing in Primo, is pretty much exactly what we have in
I-
things like display fields and requesting and sort of stuff.
I know Justin's actually configuring.
Yeah, so they just copied, they copied our institutions, which should be done. So if you've got multiple institutions, they just copy the standard one, they call it the Alma, Monash, and they copy over your normalization rules. And so it should all look pretty much the same, but all the OPP sections, locations, roles, my accounts will be different. They're now pulling from Alma and down.
So you use that.
No, they migrated all that normalization rules and
We do exactly that. We create a mirror, we call it a mirror institution. So we basically do, as Justin said, we take your current institution and we create a duplicate of it. The only thing that's different is the OVP stuff and the it's just gone straight out of my head. Oh, the pipe. That was the word, it was in there somewhere. So obviously we're not taking the pipe from Voyager anymore, we're now taking the data from Alma. So yeah, I mean they're the only two pieces that are different.
RMIT hasn't had a chance to look at the OPAC via Primo aspect yet because of authentication issues. We're waiting on Shibboleth to be set up so that we can, start looking at how that looks, which is coming any moment.
okay, question about training and staff training using Alma to go live. Have you found Libris training and documentation to be helpful, and do you anticipate that you will need to develop supplementary training resources? If so, why? And Debbie and Janette are going to answer this question.
I guess for us, we had a little bit of staff going, oh my goodness, we're going to have to train the trainer and train everyone, and I've sort of calmed them down and said it'll be no different from training any new staff in a new system or having any new staff come on board and you're training them through the process. As I said before, we're getting staff to watch webinars, although I think they're going to be consistently out of date in a way, so we're going to sort of have to watch them with a view that perhaps they're going to change quite dramatically. I was pleased to see that your help has improved online with Alma, because we do not want to go and reinvent the wheel, so we are not going to rewrite documentation or rewrite help, but what we will do is write new policy and processes. So I'm really trying to reinforce the fact that we're not going to rewrite screeds of manuals and that we should be using online help, and it's up to our supervisors to train the staff as we move through Alma, because it is changing so readily at the moment, they're just going to have to be agile to be able to keep up with the changes and the workflow changes. So I don't foresee that we'll be doing any workflow documentation at this point in time, because some will be workarounds and then they'll be gone next week, and like magic they'll be fixed. So
Debbie?
I guess I wanted to step back a little bit through the process. Again, we had access to Alma with our data the 21st of November. And then our first functional workshop wasn't until almost 2 months later. And yes, we did have a holiday period in there. But as we started with this system and having some of the same webinar trainings that you have all seen, and we scratched our heads and we still couldn't figure it out. And we couldn't do a simple process like buy a book, buy an electronic resource. And so we actually added and worked with Melanie and said we need some additional WebExes where you are literally just stepping us through, us meaning the project team, so a smaller group, just so that we can start to understand. You know, we've seen all these things. You can look at documentation, but I don't know about some of you, but I literally like to be shown, or I like to drive, so to speak. And Melanie talked us through as we drove through several processes. And after two-hour sessions going through fulfillment and acquisition and resource management, we all, well, most of us, I think, had that kind of aha, oh, phew, now, okay, there's still some bugs, there's still things to work out, but now we know how to look at it. The functional workshop was too late for that, and so just as a piece of advice, and again, it might be different for all of you, the functional workshops, then we were able to have looked at the systems and gone through processes. And so then we were able to, in the functional workshops, fine-tune those things. And again, working through with Melanie step by step, it wasn't a how-to session with her. We figured out bigger things and looked at bigger issues, like why some of our vendor lists weren't displaying properly, because we had already done some of that work. And she was able to then tweak the configuration. Or the fact that, you know, at our different campuses, there was an acquisitions department at every campus, even though we have central acquisitions. Well, then we came to the decision that we needed to make a library called ISS, or our tech services. And we had those revelations there, and we figured things out in those functional workshops rather than just the basics. So I would suggest that, and that was helpful for us.
It's a question. Have you actually looked into actually recording those tips? Because I think that would be something most users would be wanting to see or whatever. Because that'd be very useful as an insight.
Yeah, and I know, I mean, they're all recorded in our JIRA system because, I mean, I think we have about 300 items, because as we came across a stumbling block, like why are there 5 acquisitions departments?
But Debbie, I thought
Yeah.
when we had a meeting with...
What did we decide?
No,
I don't remember.
And I think we sort of agreed that after we'd sort of come to some sort of conclusions, we put her on the LML list.
That's good of us. Yeah, no, that's right. That does sound right.
I thought we mentioned that. I mean, because
No,
we're really
I'm
not
sure we did.
whether this is a red herring or
Yeah,
we're not
well,
sure.
once they become genuine,
Yes.
that's the time to actually make a short video of some sort and say, well, these are the things you're going to run into.
And I guess just because of our time constraints right now, but I mean, we definitely have lists of things like that we came upon, and they all started as a problem or a stumbling block, and then again at those functional workshops. So, yeah,
And
probably a list is the best place.
So one of the good things is that as questions come up, we've been putting them in a spreadsheet because we didn't have an alternative. But we send them to Melanie every week, and she's able to, I don't know whether she actually likes getting millions of questions from Monash, but as our staff come up, yes, we can't do this, and she'll write back to us the next week, yes, you can, it's page 53, or no, you can't, you're going to have to do a workaround. And as we've gone through the implementation configuration worksheets, I'm hoping that our questions are getting more mature. We've gone from it doesn't like this in Voyager, so why can't we do it like that in Alma, to more about how can we change the configuration, or what do we need to change in our work process because it doesn't do this. So I think it's a journey in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought with permission I would sort of try and collate everyone's, because everyone's got prepared sheets, so I'd collate them and sort of send them back to you just to make sure they're okay, and then they could go
Can I
somewhere. Helen?
just add to that, the last question, just to say that, yeah, I mean, it's a learning curve for us too. And, you know, we're kind of learning from the training that we've done with RMIT and Swinburne, of those things that have worked and those things that haven't worked, and those things that we need to review and revise and do over. And like Debbie said, you know, having the functional workshops a little earlier, maybe putting more into the initial rather than just giving you recordings, actually doing something like live WebExes with those. And obviously, you know, putting together a better training package from our side also. And to go back to something that Richard was talking about, we're also starting to do, based on what we're learning, working with you, and obviously we'll continue to learn with new projects in the future, starting to do some little like best practice type things with workflows, you know, how to order an ebook and things like that. So, you know, we'll as well be able to provide in the future more of those kinds of, you know, quick how-tos and quick workflow guides. So I think that's something that, you know, we can grow that kind of information and those kind of resources together, really, from both our sides.
Okay, the next question is about change management strategy, and Janet's going to talk about this because Monash has quite a formal change management strategy, and was talked about at the last Collaborative Partners meeting. I thought it would be something really interesting for everyone to hear Monash's methodology.
So really, I guess in a way we use a project methodology as part of the journey through change management. We know a lot of staff aren't very flexible or agile or greet change with enthusiasm. We're lucky that we've had probably 12 months to talk about Alma, so we've gone through the formal process of drafting you can see the scribbles on mine, a project charter. In that, it actually outlines the objectives, the benefits of the project charter. It's got a communication plan. It's actually a good reminder to go through these things in the project charter, the headings, to remind us that we do have to think about our stakeholders, to think about the communication strategies and when we need to communicate to our staff and how we want to communicate to our staff. We've been keeping our staff informed with regular updates in our staff bulletin. We've been doing library circulations to staff when key things are happening, so they can feel that even though those who might not be touched by Alma significantly, everybody in the library is being kept informed. We have created a steering committee, and any issues or comments or questions go through the steering committee. Now, we have to do it this way because we're such a huge organisation. So we have 3 working groups. We have a fulfilment working group. We have an integrations working group because we know that we've got a lot of systems that we've got to integrate. So we have things like SAP and Callista that we need to work with eSolutions or our IT team on how are we going to integrate Alma with authentication, with Callista, with our finance system, so we've got them on board early. We've also done regular reports to our IT department because we know that we're not going to be able to do this without them, and they're really happy to be involved in our steering committee because we're using them as a conduit to communicate to networks and security and all those key people in our IT department. And we have an acquisitions and metadata working group, and as I said, the fulfilment working group, and they're mainly consisted of supervisors and key people, operational people on the ground that can start working through processes. But what the steering committee is doing is empowering those working groups to be able to come up with recommendations about what we can stop doing, about how we can change 4,000 fund codes into 3 fund codes, and coming up with those really radical things that the steering committee help them make the decisions on, so they don't feel like they're having to make all of the decisions on their own, and that they've got buy-in from myself and other directors and the university librarian. And I think that's been really key to part of the journey, and it has taken us probably a good 6 months to get people engaged in that journey and to feel comfortable with the radical change that we're hoping Alma will bring. I'm also starting to work with staff about changing their position descriptions. I don't want any indispensable people in my team. I don't want the silos, and it's a little bit unfortunate that Alma sort of still seems to be a little bit siloed, and that the new terminology fulfilment is at the top level, but as you start to go back down, it starts to talk about circulation and all that, that 1970 terminology that we wanted to get rid of, because terminology for us is key to our change process. So we call things service points. We've got rid of that term desk, because we don't want people working on desks, and changing the service ethics. So it's really important that that's part of the communication process, and I'd really like to see it in Alma as well, that you've done a really good job at that top level of terminology, but there's some confusion. Sometimes you call it fulfilment down in the lower levels, and then it flicks back to circulation, so it would be good to get those together. So it's really, it's been a long journey, but I think our staff now are much more agile, working much more flexibly, and asking do we really need to do this? And we've said, you've got to stop doing something. What are we going to stop doing? I'm giving you permission to come here and say, here's 5 things that we no longer can do, because we just can't do everything. And Alma, fortunately, doesn't enable us to do everything. Gone are the days of Voyager, gone are the days of being print-based. We have to move forward in electronic. So it's been a big talk fest, really. It's part of the change management process.
Just not knowing what it, within that charter, did you make a commitment to staff that there would be no job losses, or?
You can't ever make that commitment.
No, so what is that? So what is
You can't make that commitment. All I'm making we're making the commitment that we will ensure that our staff are trained to be flexible and agile, and that we can't commit that your job will be the same as you had yesterday. So that's why we're trying to work with...
No, but there'll be a place within the organisation.
Of course, and I've been talking to the unions endlessly about what does this mean, and it is about change management and managing process, and a lot of it is actually, I think, comes out of misunderstanding about what your PD is and how that's managed in your performance review, and if I can't do this, that means I'm going to get a big cross, and talking to supervisors about empowering their own staff to manage change as well. And Alma's been good because it's actually given us a tool really to do change management, not just for Alma but across the board as universities are tightening the purse strings. So it's been a good tool to help us rethink our workflows and what we can do more efficiently, what we can streamline, but I think really what we can stop doing.
Well, our time has come to an end, and I think that we could have actually gone on for another hour or so. We haven't quite got through all our questions, but I'd like to join me in thanking our panel.
Okay, yes, also my thanks to the people who participated. You put out a call onto the ANZREG list and you don't know what's going to come back, and you have a panel discussion like this and you don't know what's going to come out of it. So I'm really pleased. We came up with a list of questions and I'm really pleased to see some really fantastic responses. I've taken heaps of notes. We're doing lots of clean-up at Otago at the moment. We haven't actually started the process off. We have looked at all the configuration stuff and put them in. Well, no, we haven't put them in the too hard pile. I may have. it's really great. And looking forward to the first live system in Australasia. 7 weeks' time? Excellent. So when do we get a tour of it? Okay, so thank you. It is now, one of the things I should have mentioned is that we did record that session, and we will make available the questions plus some of the answers that we didn't get time to go through. So it is now afternoon tea time. I'm sure you know where to go by now. So thank you.